One of my favourite roach baits is hemp and tares, fishing tares on the hook, and for the most part on the river that means fishing from the start of the season in June, although it's a bit slow going, but probably by July fairly good bait, and then right up until sometime maybe late September, October or so, when it just loses its effectiveness. I've had people comment that they can catch on hemp and tares right through the winter, and yet I've seen this fantastic drop off in how good hemp and tares are for catching roach on the Stour. So am I completely wrong? Am I doing something wrong? What's the difference? What's going on? I've had a quick look through my fishing diaries, and the latest of my normal hemp and tare fishing that has worked has been the 1st of November, and the day before that on that same bit of water I had £20, so 31st of October, £20 of roach and dace, really good mixed bag, some good fish over £1.5 pounds, plenty of good fish. I don't think the roach fishing is as good as that nowadays. That was over a decade ago, but a fairly defined cut-off point, and year after year, of course, it varies where I'm fishing and how I'm fishing. Sometime in October it sort of tails off and I'm switching to maggots or bread. Sometimes flood water, colder water knocks it on the head, and yet, like I say, people are saying, hang on, I'm fishing hemp and tares, I'm catching fish on hemp right through the middle of the winter. What is going on? So I needed to have a think about this. I needed to see if I could get hemp and tares to work in the winter, and I knew that there's a still water not too far from me that is absolutely rammed with small roach. It's full of little roach from this to 6 or 8 ounces, with a few slightly bigger ones, but you would call it a water full of hungry, starving, slightly stunted roach. The growth rates aren't that good. It's also full of small carp that, depending on how you fish for them, there are loads and loads and loads, from a couple of ounces up to about 3 or 4 pounds, and there's a few bigger ones, 7 or 8 pounds, even double figures, but lots and lots of carp. So you've got a lot of hungry fish, and you can go up there as long as it's not frozen over really hard. But on a mild winter's day, you can put a tail on the hook and you will catch fish, and I did just that quite recently. I had over 30 carp and a similar number of roach. Best carp was about 3 pounds. Most of them were only up to about £1.5 pounds, and I was catching carp on tares as fast as I put it in the water, in between getting roach, and the biggest roach is 5 or 6 ounces, and even quite small roach, fish under an ounce, were taking tares. So that gives me a clue as to what might be happening on rivers where people are, and drains where people are catching on hemp and tares in the middle of winter. There are places in the fens, the old Welland in Spalding, where that's a good example of where the fish from the wide Welland cram into this stretch of narrow, shallow water in the winter. So the wide Welland is largely devoid of roach. Still got the bream, which also shoal together, but the roach, which is spread right through the wide Welland, through several miles of river, cram into this short stretch of river, which is almost like a drain in the winter, and it's absolutely solid with roach. And there are other fenland drains that are like this, and people then fish with hemp and tares, trying to get, if they fish with pinky, they might get very small fish and a maggot slightly bigger, and they're hoping to get a slightly better quality of fish. And it needs skillful fishing, probably with a pole or a whip, to get the finesse needed. But if they're trying to win a match, if they can catch fish that maybe 3 ounces instead of 3 to the ounce, they haven't got to go much, they don't have to go as fast as the person catching the tiny fish to get a much better weight. And you can see why that works. That's exactly the same as the still water that I fished. Now, my mate Wayne, who I'm sure won't mind me mentioning him, has said that he's caught at Wimborne on the Stour on tears in the winter. Now, Wimborne over the last 4 years, the fishing has changed. I think what's happened is that for a while, going back up to 3 or 4 years ago, the cormorants were deterred, shall we say, from being there, and the fishing became very good. Some tremendous catches. I think my best catch about 3 or 4 years ago, 3 years ago, was 40 pounds of roach in 4 hours on a highish river. That was on bread, using plenty of ground bait, and there were match weights to over 30 pounds. And each year the fishing has gone down a step, and this year I haven't even bothered fishing it. The conditions haven't been good. It's been either very high or then it's dropped and got clear, and the fish that are there have been tightly shoaled. Last year it wasn't that good. Did get some reasonable catches, but certainly not the 30 and 40 pounds that were coming out 3 years ago. And the roach weren't as widespread either. So whether Wayne caught at times when it was really good and really prolific, so we're back to the hungry roach competing at lots of fish there, I don't know. So I had to think of maybe somewhere on the Stour where there might be a lot of roach, and I found somewhere on the upper Stour that I'm not going to name. People who know it. I don't need to tell them where it is. But there's an area of river of maybe 100 yards where the roach cram in the winter. Lots of these fish are very small, lots of tiny roach. You can put a maggot on there and you'll catch tiny roach one after another, and you'll get the odd slightly better one. And people have tried other baits. They tried bread punch will still get you quite small roach. You can persevere and get slightly better ones. But people have even fished tiny mini boilies on there, tutti frutti. Anyway, there's 1 or 2 people who will know the joke about tutti frutti, about someone who fishes with those and gets the odd better roach. So that was the natural place to try, and I'm going to show you fishing there. And I only fed hemp. This is February. It's reasonably mild, 8 or 9, 10 degrees. And I just put a big Avon float on, dropped it in, tears on a 16 on the hook. And the first session I ended up with over 30 roach in a couple of hours. And then I went back a week later and I had a couple of dozen roach. The second time was slightly interesting. I tried about 50 yards above this hot spot where I'm sure there were lots of fish, but I didn't get any response at all until I put a maggot on it, even though it was only a single maggot on a 16, not exactly balanced right. And I did get a tiny roach, and I got a bleak as well. It was the first time I've ever caught a bleak that far up the river. But local anglers have told me this last year or so that there are bleak up there, and now I've seen the evidence on my own eyes. Having moved into the hot spot after half an hour of no real success, I was straight away into roach again. And as I was feeding the hemp, I didn't have very long, I noticed that the roach were coming up in the water, and eventually I shallowed up from about 11 foot to 5 foot, and I carried on catching roach exactly the same. So you've got something like 11 or 12 foot of water, and pick your own figure, 8 foot of it is roach. It's ridiculous, and some of those are quite good roach. How you find the bigger ones unless you just fish silly baits, like a boilie or even a maple pea or something, I don't know. And it doesn't appeal to me much as fishing, but it proves the point that in the right circumstances, tears will work in the winter. I've tried them on 1 or 2 other still waters where there's plenty of roach. Since then, on a mild day, fed hemp, no response at all. And on one particular water, I shall be interested to see when the hemp and tears start to work. I think by May it will work. I didn't realise hemp and tears would work on this particular water at all, having fished it for many years, until someone showed me the way last summer on there, and I thought, what's that bait you got there? Oh, tears. Okay, put one on, and he threw it out there and got a bite. Okay, and I scrunched some of his bait and caught roach. So there's a water I shall give more of a go with, hemp and tears. So we're on the way to spring now, and the river season, by the time you watch this, the river season will be over. But there is a chance that hemp and tears will work in the winter. I've also recently seen people saying that they were catching roach at Stourport on the Severn on hemp and tears in February and March. So there's no doubt it can work. Whether it needs people to feed it and fish it, that must contribute to them being used to it and feeding on it in the winter. But I still suspect that roach have a feeding pattern over the whole year generally, and certain types of food appeal to them more at certain times of the year. After spawning, they seem to like to feed on silkweed and vegetable matter, and then move on to different foods, things like maggots, insect life, in other words, and crustaceans, and also tiny snails, which might explain why we sometimes struggle on the rivers at the start of the season in the middle of June, and then in July the roach start to feed more consistently. As ever with fishing, there's lots to think about. No black and white answers, lots of shades of grey and lots of contradictions. But by experimenting, trying things, being prepared to say, hey, I failed occasionally, and not sticking to rigidly to one way of fishing, one bait, we can learn lots more and have a lot more fun in our fishing. Until next time, it's goodbye for now.